My name is Janice Hardy. I am the Regional Director of Emergency Services for the YWCA, and I have been with the YWCA for 25 years. The biggest changes that I've seen this impact in our community today is homelessness. Our homeless community has gotten larger and larger all over our city. What we can do as an agency to be able to be at the table to support families and individuals with housing. We have joined together with some of our funders to make sure that we are at the table to figure out what it would take for us to move forward to supporting families and single adults that are experiencing homelessness. There has to be a system approach to our homelessness that we are currently working on. But I do know homelessness, when you take a look at homelessness, there are other things that keep people homeless, such as drug addiction, mental health, not being able to get to the services that they need in order to stabilize. What we're really trying to do here at the YWCA is really not just look at homelessness. We are taking an approach that we want to look at all around services for families. I always say this, we're there to speak for people that can't speak for themselves. And it's not that they can't speak for themselves, but they're not being heard. And sometimes you need organizations like the YWCA to stand on the side of you, not in front of you. It's important to walk with the people we serve. It's important that our community know that we're here, we're listening, we understand, and we're here to push some envelopes that sometimes is very difficult to push, especially for African American people. I feel so privileged and so blessed to work for the YWCA. And especially, I've always felt like that I want to be able to work with people that look like me. Keep pushing the envelope. We're onto something. We are onto something. There is no other agencies out here that is wearing the mission that the YWCAs are wearing. Walk that talk, keep pushing the envelope. Our work is important, and it's important for our community.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here with you. I have some amazing, amazing women who are going to join me this afternoon. But first, I wanted to introduce myself and talk a little bit about our national racial justice work that the YWCA is doing. My name is Margaret Mitchell, and I'm so proud to be the CEO of YWCA USA. We are a 200 member network strong associations all across the United States. And April is our opportunity really to commemorate how important racial justice is for all of us in this country. And so we are so delighted to be able to kick off our national campaign, Until Justice Just Is. There will be opportunities all over the country to engage with local associations of the YWCA who are taking a organizational and personal stand against racism. And you will see so many activities and opportunities to engage in our Until Justice Just Is campaign. But one of the most powerful pieces is the opportunity to join us in our racial justice challenge. This is a 21-day challenge that will provide some amazing opportunities of growth and tools for every individual. And you can do it solo, you can do it as an organization. This really is a time to build community, to create new tools for yourself, to be able to dig in and learn and identify no matter where you are in your racial justice journey. Doing this challenge will allow you to grow. And so you'll hear more information about that. And if you are surprised that we have 200 associations all across the country focused in on racial equity, you shouldn't be. It is true that we are 160 years old. We are a legacy organization. And it's really in the 1930s that the YWCA begins to pivot to focus in on discrimination. And by 1940, we had passed a national bylaw with our National Board of Directors that mandated that the YWCA begin the process of integrating all of its YWCAs. We had YWCAs that were all white. We had YWCAs that were all Black. We had YWCAs focused in on Indigenous women. And women of color all across the country were segregated by the YWCA. And in the 40s, we began to know that we had to rectify this issue. And we made a policy statement on paper, and it would take years for hearts and minds begin to move. And what we saw in the 40s is not unlike so much of what we see today all across the country. It really was one woman working with an incredible team at USA and around the country, Dr. Dorothy Height, that would really galvanize our work in the most amazing way. Dr. Dorothy Height became our first director of racial equity at YWCA USA. You can read about her amazing work in the history books, and you can also understand that what she did for us was really the opportunity to operationalize our work, not just talk about it in theory, but to bring it home in such a powerful work that this was our housing, this was our early childhood education work, this was our women's empowerment work, and that we could not see women rise if we weren't all going to rise together. And this clarion call is the same call that we have today for our work. Until justice just is not an exception. This is not an exception. This is a right that we want to see for every single person across the country. YWCA joins with so many other partners many of whom you're going to meet today across the country to be able to do this work. And now I'm really excited to be able to introduce my colleague in Boston at YW Boston, Beth Chandler, who is going to introduce a very special mayor for us.
Margaret, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm excited to be here to introduce the Mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu. Mayor Wu is the first woman of color elected mayor in the city of Boston. And Mayor Wu understands the challenges that all Bostonians face when it comes to housing, and especially those on the margins. Mayor Wu understands the intersection of housing and food safety, mental health, and other issues. We are thrilled to have her as Mayor of Boston, and as YW Boston, we are so excited to partner with the mayor and her colleagues to help make Boston a more equitable city for all. YW Boston focuses on helping women, people of color, and especially women of color thrive at all levels here in Boston. And we are thrilled and excited to partner with Mayor Michelle Wu and her team to help make Boston a more equitable community for all of us. With no further ado, Mayor Michelle Wu.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Wu and I'm honored to serve as Mayor of Boston. Thank you to the YWCA for inviting me to be a part of this very special event. In Boston, we know that housing is foundational to all the work that we're doing. Skyrocketing housing prices are displacing kids and families, driving school enrollment down and homelessness up. The housing crisis hurts our local businesses and adds strain to our public health and safety systems too. And because housing touches every aspect of life in our city, our approach has to be comprehensive as well. Our Office of Housing works closely with nonprofits and community organizations to connect residents to emergency, transitional, or permanent supportive housing. Our Office of Housing Stability supports those who have been displaced, whether by fire, eviction, or other circumstances. And our Office of Fair Housing ensures that identity and background are never barriers to calling Boston home. We're deploying every tool, every strategy, every resource to protect existing housing and create more housing that residents can afford. From proposing legislation to stop rent gouging through rent stabilization, to greater incentives for developing affordable housing and mortgage assistance programs designed to boost homeownership, especially among residents of color. At the core of this approach is our commitment to creating a city for everyone. Our Equity and Inclusion Cabinet is dedicated to ensuring that all our residents have equal access to opportunities, resources, and services. And that mission is shared across all our departments and offices equally, from women's empowerment and immigrant advancement to our Commission on Black Men and Boys and LGBTQ+ advancement. In particular, I want to highlight the work of our Disabilities Commission. The team works closely with the Boston Planning and Development Agency and the Office of Housing and private developers to go beyond meeting minimum access requirements and instead aim for ideal accessibility. Last year, we updated our zoning code to require developers to complete an accessibility checklist, ensuring their projects center accessibility throughout the entire process. Recent research by the Boston Foundation confirmed what our families have been telling us for a long time. Residents are healthier when they have access to stable housing. ER visits for children drop by nearly half when families have access to housing counselors or rental subsidies. And those impacts aren't just limited to physical health either. The same study found that housing support has far-reaching effects when it comes to reducing anxiety and depression as well, with rates falling by 50% in some cases for those who receive assistance. So, because factors like race, gender, mental health, and disability status often intersect to deepen disparities in housing, we're coming up with solutions that intersect too. We're delivering policies and partnerships that ensure our residents don't have to choose between accessibility and affordability, quality, and stability. We're creating housing that's not more affordable in spite of its climate resilience, but because of it. We're working to close the racial wealth gap, advance disability justice, and deliver on housing as a universal human right. Thank you again to the YWCA for giving me the chance to share a little bit about the work we're doing here at the City of Boston, most importantly, for being such a valuable partner in this work all across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you for your amazing work at YW Boston. I'm so honored to be able to come alongside you and partner with you in so many ways. And Mayor Wu, I want to thank you for everything that you are doing in Boston. You are a trailblazing mayor, and we are so delighted and proud that you were able to bring remarks and inspiration to us today. And now it really is my pleasure to be able to introduce Candace Presley. She is with the ABC affiliate in Atlanta, and she is an amazing advocate for women and girls, a wonderful partner to YWCA. And I'm so delighted that Candace is able to join us, help us navigate and facilitate our conversation. Candace?
Margaret, thank you so very much. And thank you to the YWCA nationally for inviting me to be with you all today to help facilitate this very important conversation and to have this very important call to action at the end of our program. It's my pleasure now to introduce our guests on the panel today. We are joined by Lisa Rice. She is the president and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance. She leads this organization's efforts to advance fair housing principles, to preserve and broaden fair housing protections, and expand equal housing opportunities for millions of Americans. Ms. Rice is a published author, contributing to a number of books and journals addressing a range of fair housing issues. She played a major role in crafting sections of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, and also in establishing the Office of Fair Lending within the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And we say welcome to you, Lisa Rice. We also want to introduce a very special guest with a unique perspective on our conversation today, Dara Starr Tucker. She is a musician, a social commentator, and an influencer. She engages her audiences as an artist and satirist, as an influencer with a following of nearly 1 million on TikTok, 62,000 on Instagram. Dara engages her audience with captivating commentaries on human rights, music, and the arts, as well as education and political action. She organized and spoke at the very first online decon convention for the religious deconstruction community, and her work has been featured in campaigns for HBO, FX, Ebony, and Jet magazine. So we want to welcome our guests to this panel today. And Margaret, as we begin, we want to focus on housing, we want to focus on mental health, and we want to focus on ways to raise awareness in this community and activate people on how we can get things done. As we know, and Lisa as well, discrimination in housing was officially outlawed decades ago, yet it persists today. Lisa, why do you think that is?
Candace, that is an excellent question. And actually, I'll provide a little historical perspective here. Discrimination in housing was actually outlawed during Reconstruction. So the first fair housing law was passed in 1866. But from the 100-year period between 1866 and 1966, that law was used twice. So while there were literally millions of instances of housing discrimination, the law was never used. And quite frankly, it wasn't used because we were having racial violence in our nation during that period. Jim Crow laws were commonplace throughout the South, and discrimination was a part of the fabric of our society. Dr. King was assassinated on April the 4th of 1968, and the Federal Fair Housing Act was passed 7 days after his assassination on April the 7th. It was passed, I'm sad to say, because of his assassination and his death. Had it not been for his death, we would not have the Federal Fair Housing Act. But what the Fair Housing Act did was it put the force of the federal government, the Department of Justice, the FBI, behind this new national policy that President Johnson wanted to see, this national policy of fair housing for all. And you're so right, Candace, fair housing is still persistent. In fact, there are over 4 million instances of housing discrimination that happen each year. And then we continue to see huge disparities. I mean, if you look at the racial wealth gap, huge disparities there. When you look at households with families, white households with families have 100 times the wealth of Black households with families. It's a penny, Black families have a penny on the dollar of the wealth. That wealth gap is driven by our racial homeownership gap. And there are many other gaps, but the reason that we have these disparities and we see persistence and discrimination is, quite frankly, Candace, because the systems, the racialized systems that were put in place over the centuries in the United States are still in place today, quite frankly. So if you think about it, over the course of our history, we have had thousands of race-based laws, the Indian Removal Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, racially restrictive covenants, Jim Crow laws, Black codes. I mean, we've had thousands of race-based laws that were explicitly designed to provide opportunities for our white peers, but deny opportunities for people of color. And those racialized laws and policies created systems of inequality, systems like residential segregation, which is, of course, still with us today. Our communities, in fact, Candace, are more segregated today. We are more segregated today than we were 100 years ago. Residential segregation is still with us. We have a biased appraisal system that was put in place by our federal government, quite frankly. That biased appraisal structure is still in place today. We still have restrictive and exclusionary zoning ordinances that are on the books today that were put in place decades ago. And so, Candace, essentially what we've done is we passed civil rights laws like the Fair Housing Act that say, sort of on a transactional basis, right, Candace, if I'm a lender and I'm giving you a loan, I can't consider your gender. I can't consider your race if I'm extending credit to you. But we've left in place the discriminatory and racialized systems like the credit scoring systems and the risk-based pricing systems and the automated underwriting systems that will deny you the credit. So until we remove these racialized and unfair, unjust structures, until we dismantle the systems of inequality and replace them with fair and just structures, we're going to continue to see the prevalence of discrimination in our society.
And yet, Lisa, there are some who would argue, many who are elected leaders and in positions of power, that systemic racism does not exist in our society. I suspect you would strongly disagree.
I would strongly disagree with that. And I'm backtracking in my mind, Candace. I want to make sure that I've got this right, because I think I might have said the Fair Housing Act passed on April the 7th. It passed on April the 11th, 7 days after Dr. King's assassination. But you're absolutely right. Systemic racism is alive and well today, and it's sort of pernicious. I mean, because if you think about it, these structures that we're talking about, right? The biased appraisal structure, biased algorithms, restrictive zoning ordinances, this really unfair landscape, right? And the society in which we live that is driving and perpetuating these disparate outcomes. We can't see the systems. They're blind, right? You can't see the algorithm. You can't see the zoning. You don't know, right, that Black and Latino communities are disproportionately zoned for industrial use or commercial use as opposed to residential use. And so therefore, when communities are trying to figure out where do we put the factories, where do we put the landfill, where do we put the toxic facilities, well, you put them in the spaces that are zoned for commercial use or non-residential use, which are the Black and brown neighborhoods. And so therefore, the spaces where Black and brown people are living are more heavily polluted. In fact, Black people are dying from pollution at a rate that is 3 times higher than that of our white counterparts. But what you do see, though, you see the outcomes. You see the outcomes. So you see that Black people make less money than white people do. You see that Black people have less wealth. You see that people of color are denied for mortgage loans at a higher rate. You see that people of color don't have access to home ownership opportunities at the same rates, right? You see that the majority of people in the United States who are homeowners are white, and the majority of renters are people of color. And so when you see those outcomes, you say, oh, well, there's something wrong with the person, right? Because the system is clandestine. It is veiled. You can't see the system, but you see the outcome and you see the differences sort of in the people who are impacted by these outcomes. And so you ascribe the outcome to the person rather than the system. And that is the problem that we have today. It's the problem with the laws that we're seeing put forth by some legislators to tamp down what they're calling critical race theory, which really is not critical race theory. They're just trying to tamp down truth-telling. They're trying to tamp down the exposure of these things that we're talking about so that these unjust systems can be fixed. And we have to keep sort of peeling back the layers of the onion and unveiling these unfair systems and how they're impacting us all so that they can be eliminated and replaced with just systems.
You've prompted a couple of questions. Margaret, I'm coming to you in just a moment to talk about the ways in which the YWCA is working to address homelessness and racism through the organization. But first, Lisa, as you talk about truth-telling, I see Dara nodding her head. As an artist, as a truth-teller, I know you want to weigh in.
You know what? I don't know that I have a whole lot to say. I'm just loving all of this. I'm loving it so much because, Lisa, because of the work you do, you have a way of just honing right in on the truth of the matter. And these are conversations that I have in my comment section. I'm primarily in the social media space. So I have these conversations in my comment section on a daily basis. And when you talk about these issues and talk about, you know, the structures that exist and the issues of systemic racism, it's kind of become a common clapback amongst a certain group to just deny that it's a problem, deny that it exists. And, you know, it's like trying to prove a negative or something. They can get you kind of caught up in these conversations that really don't have a conclusion. They don't have an ending. They are attempting to get you to disprove something or prove that something doesn't exist or prove that something does exist. And it just can be a never-ending tangle of rhetoric. And it can be very frustrating to try to nail to try to nail folks down on just opening up and admitting, as you said, wanting to have the conversations that need to be had. But there has to be a certain openness, I think, to wanting to understand these systems that kind of control our culture, that control our world. And if there is not an openness, then I hit these dead ends all the time. So I'm just appreciating the directness and the succinctness with which you describe these issues, Lisa, because as you said, to try and explain to someone the truth of something that exists but is not seen, cannot be completely verbalized, can be a frustrating matter. So I'm just enjoying your expertise. That's the reason for my nodding, Candace.
And Dara, you raised something that I think is so important. I mean, one of the conversations I see a lot on social media is the conversation around criminal justice issues, right? And law enforcement issues. I mean, that's played out so much. I mean, it sort of reached an apex after the murder of George Floyd. And you just see all these different responses, right? When a person of color is killed by law enforcement, you just see all of these responses. It's that person's fault. It's that person's fault. If they had just complied, if they had just done, all of these things that no human being would do. I mean, just watching the murder of Tyre Nichols, I'm struggling to keep my composure right now. I mean, it's what more could he have done? It's absolutely ridiculous. And what you're saying, Dara, is really striking such a profound point. I mean, and so we in the comments section, we're trying to explain, but wait a minute, like when people say, well, Black people and Latino people are incarcerated at higher rates because they commit more crimes, right? And then you try to come back with the truth, right? Well, wait a minute. Black people, Latino people, Asian American people, white people, all races use and sell what we call illegal substances at the same rate. Mm-hmm. But Black people are arrested for substance abuse related crimes at 6 times the rate of our white counterparts, and Latinos are arrested at 5 times the rate of our white counterparts. So even though there's an equal amount of usage, the arrest rates are not the same, and that is because our communities are hyper-policed. We're not hyper-protected by law enforcement. We're hyper-policed. And one of the things I have to say, Dara, is I really appreciate you, the work you do, and the work of others in the art, the music industry and the arts industry for calling attention to these criminal justice inequities.
Oh, absolutely. I was having a conversation with my publicist. Actually, I'm getting ready to release another album here in a couple of months. And the last album that I did was completely focused on social justice because it happened right in the wake of the George Floyd killing, Breonna Taylor as well. And the next album I'm doing is not specifically focused on that, but it does attempt to kind of blend my work in the social justice space online with my music, those, merging those two identities. And one of the things that she said was, well, social justice is a bit, and I don't fault her. She said, social justice, I think people are a bit fatigued on that because, everyone's involved in that right now. And it can be a little bit frustrating when it does kind of take on this identity of sort of being a trend or a fad or something that people are excited about doing content around or having discussions around when there's violence that happens, when there's tragedy that happens. Then we're excited to hear people speaking out or creating art around that. But if it's not the fad, if it's not the latest thing, it isn't necessarily something that's welcomed or invited. But we have to, as artists, we have to remember to be vigilant in spite of that. So I appreciate your encouragement in that respect.
And yet gender-based violence remains a leading cause and consequence of homelessness for especially women and their children, with disproportionately impacts BIPOC women, LGBTQ individuals. Ladies, can we break down this statistic and perhaps for our audience provide some clarity as to why this too is the case?
You know, at first, I do want to address that, but I just have to go back to the statement Lisa made in terms of 1866 and housing laws being on the books. And between 1866 and 1966, there were two incidents that were, I'm going to say brought to trial. I don't know if that is the right language, but my goodness, that is just really, for me, points to the importance of having policy, federal policy, and why it is so imperative that we need the federal policy. And yet Lisa has walked us through all of the gaps and the holes. And if you want to have some weekend reading, I just encourage everybody to go and read the Fair Housing Law, and you will clearly see all of the opportunities for us to be able to work with our individual city councils around being able to take this incredible law and really come into 100% compliance, which we are not. We are not in compliance. There's so much opportunity for us to take action through our current channels around our city council, county governments, to be able to walk in and demand that we live up to the standard that has been placed in that fair housing law. And Lisa, thank you. I love the history and being able to show just the gaps and the loopholes. I'm with Dara, just really feeling just an internal call around, if not now, when. And we cannot grow weary in this work. And as we look at homelessness, which is something that is rampant in our country, and so many of our associations across the country are involved in sheltering the unhoused, and we know that this is not an individual flaw. Again, are really looking at a structural system in which we have economics that don't make sense, that don't allow people to be able to maintain apartments and housing. And we have a huge tsunami. Lisa, I know you are aware of the tsunami coming for older individuals, particularly older or elderly women above the age of 60, who are finding themselves unhoused as a result of years of economic inequities that they are faced month to month that enable them from being able to maintain proper and adequate housing.
Yeah, Margaret, you're so right. And when you talk about this tsunami of economic issues that seem to be coming to a precipice. I mean, I coming to their precipice. I was holding my breath, hoping that the Federal Reserve would not raise interest rates yesterday, and then they did. And I'm like, don't they realize that every time they raise interest rates, they're just raising housing costs, and that's just exacerbating things further, which means that we're going to have more incidences of homelessness. And when you think about the growing rates of homelessness in the United States, we know that women, and in particular Black women, Black mothers, are amongst the groups that are experiencing some of the highest rates of homelessness these days. I think 92% of mothers, we know that violence plays a role there. 92% of women who have children have reported that they have been victimized by physical violence or domestic abuse or sexual harassment. That's huge. Think about that. 92% of homeless women have experienced violence. 25% of women writ large who are homeless report the reason they're homeless is because of violence, domestic violence in their home. We have got to address this scourge in our society. It's one of the reasons why I am so happy that President Biden supported the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization and renewal. We needed that. It's to pretend as the, and I don't want to get into politics here, but as the previous administration did, to pretend that this is no longer an issue was just a travesty and, quite frankly, irresponsible. And so we do now have new dollars coming on online because of the reauthorization of VAWA. We do have new dollars coming online to help women who are victimized by sexual assault and other types of violence. And the last thing that I'll say, Margaret, is that during the COVID pandemic, when the pandemic hit, one of the things that my members reached out to me and said, and my members are fair housing groups throughout the nation who are working on the ground in communities, helping people who are experiencing housing discrimination. I just started getting calls from people saying that they are they were experiencing an increase in reports of sexual harassment. And if you think about it, we were told you got to stay home. You cannot leave. You have to stay. You have to stay in place. And so women were at home all day. Their landlords knew exactly where to come and find them. The maintenance staff knew exactly where to come and find them. And your landlord has the keys to your home. And so we saw an increase in reports of sexual harassment when the pandemic hit. So that just lets you know that if people feel that they can take advantage of women, if they see women as vulnerable, they will do that. So it means that we have to be diligent and vigilant.
There is no question that we also at the YWCA saw increased numbers, unprecedented numbers during the pandemic in terms of intimate partner violence. And that is devastating news. And at the same time, I really just, I do see some amazing emerging practices happening all across the country that I am excited about, that is funded by VAWA and the support that comes through that aid. And it includes being able to create pictures of healthy masculinity for boys and girls all across the country. We have our associations in Middle Tennessee doing some amazing work in that space, and other associations across the country really picking up this emerging best practice. And I also see within homelessness, a decrease in the amount of time from unhoused to housed. And I get excited about the focus on wanting to get to functional zero, that homelessness can become rare and brief, that the time spent in homelessness, we can decrease that time. And our association, your organization, really focused in on hammering how important it is to mitigate the length of time individuals are spending unhoused because of the significant trauma that it does to young people. We have large numbers of young individuals, unaccompanied minors who are unhoused. And we do not want to see young people become chronically homeless. This is not the goal. And today, it is still unfortunate the way some aid is only available, vouchers and housing and other opportunities to step into stability is only possible when you can meet a threshold of being able to identify long periods of homelessness. And I have never, as an administrator, been able to make sense in my brain how it makes sense to create these thresholds of long-term homelessness in order to be able to benefit from support. And all of this, with young people, I am so encouraged. And I know that music and social media plays a huge part in the way young people are able to activate today. And I certainly do know that young people have always led the way, and so encouraged by everything that is happening and how, Dara is able to use her influence to be able to speak to all of us, but particularly continuing to activate young people in these spaces.
Yeah, I think so. I think, that's the power. It always has been the power of social media. Within the TikTok space, which is one of the platforms that's really allowed me to reach a very broad audience. In particular, social media activism is so it's so powerful, and it's so prominent on TikTok specifically. With these hearings that we have coming up, we have on the table the possibility of TikTok being shut down. And I think we all have to pay very, very close attention to this. TikTok came to prominence as like a dance app, and I think a lot of people still carry that perception of that app in their minds. But you would be surprised at the amount of information, education, not always the highest quality, but a lot of high quality information and education is shared, particularly on that app. And it's such a sticky platform in terms of virality and drawing people of like-mindedness to specific around to be able to coalesce around specific topics such as this. And there are many, many experts who have offered their expertise on that platform specifically. So I'm going to be watching very closely the hearings that are happening coming up, because, as you said, younger people, Gen Z, I mean, they're not playing about these issues. There are so many young people, so many more young people than there have been in the past, certainly than there were in the era when I was in college or whatever. We were Gen Xers, and we kind of sat back and were just, as John Mayer said, he wrote a song called "Waiting on the World to Change." That's kind of what we were doing. We saw our parents, who were the boomers. We saw that period of activism, and just, and so much good came out of it, but there was so much disillusionment around it by the time I hit the age of, where I became aware of anything. So it's really exciting for me to see just how motivated and how mobilized the younger generation is today. And a lot of that activism around issues like this are happening on TikTok.
And largely because there is that direct interaction between someone like you, Dara, who is a content creator, and the audience that you seek to reach and who seeks to hear the messages that you want to share. I want to pivot just a bit and open up our conversation to the issue of mental health when it comes to mental health disparities, how that impacts and influences homelessness. Lisa, you opened the door to this when you talked about what COVID exposed when it came to mental health, racial disparities, and homelessness. How, in an effort to move the ball down the field, to use a sports analogy, can we address these concerns to make more of a positive impact?
Yeah, so Candace, this is an area that has been fraught with challenges over the years. The disability rights community fought long and hard for the ability of people with disabilities to be able to gain their own independence and to be more in control of their lives, right? But what we did not do was ensure that our healthcare system could keep up with those kinds of progressive movements. And because our healthcare system hasn't been able to keep up, we don't do a good job in the United States of America of caring for people who experience mental health crises or who have mental health issues long term. And we also don't do a really good job in this nation of sort of dissipating or mitigating things that can lead to mental health crises. I mean, look at our society now. We are traumatizing people for no good reason, right? We are traumatizing people who are not housed for literally no good reason. We are traumatizing young people who want to go to school and get an education and learn about their culture and learn about their history. We are traumatizing these young people who just want to learn about themselves and their families and their predecessors. We're traumatizing women who want to seek reproductive health care. I mean, we're traumatizing people for no good reason. And we're contributing to people's mental health instabilities. But then we don't have any type of system to make sure that we're supporting people when they experience an episode. If you look at our law enforcement, I mean, why it is not standard practice for every law enforcement agency in this nation to provide training or to have a special unit within their division that has the expertise and the knowledge about how to work with people who are dealing with a mental health crisis is absolutely beyond me. We have pummeled our law enforcement agencies with money. We have given them ample resources. They could do this very easily, but there's just not the will to do that. And so what I think it takes, Candace, is really bold leadership. It takes bold leadership because we have to change some paradigms here. We have to change some structures here. We have to destigmatize the whole issue around mental health issues. We still stigmatize it too much. And we have to be able to be a society that supports people who can get the help. We have to be a society that can support people who can get the help that they need when they need it.
And yet microaggressions, discrimination, witnessing or being a victim of racial violence continues to have a significant negative impact on the mental health of communities that are marginalized. And yet the people who can make the change and make the difference deny that there is a real problem. How do we address that?
Well, that's a great question, Candace. I think the reason that people who are empowered to make a difference don't make a difference for a number of reasons. I think they fear that there is this fear, this sort of general fear, that if you win, I lose. Right? We call that the zero-sum game.
Yes, that is.
Right. And so if you win, I lose automatically. If you get more power, it will somehow lessen my power. And what we don't realize is that the question of equity is not about a zero-sum game. In fact, researchers show, Candace, that if we eliminated racial inequality in our society, we would increase, if we eliminate racial inequality against Black people alone, not Latino people, Native American people, Asian American, just Black people alone, we would increase the US GDP by $5 trillion. That's trillion dollars over a 5-year period. What we don't understand is that increasing equity and inclusion increases our economic prowess. It increases our ability to be a more productive society. It expands the pie. The pie doesn't stay the same. It increases exponentially. And so it's not that you get a smaller piece of the pie, it's that we all now get sort of an equal piece of the pie, if you will. And people don't get that. And so part of the resistance that we're seeing, all of these anti-woke laws and anti-CRT laws, which are really not about stopping critical race theory at all. They're about suppressing our ability to be educated about the truth. The reason these laws exist is because people are trying to hold on to their power. They're trying to hold on to their resources. They're afraid that if you get more power, Candace, or if Dara gets more power, or if Margaret gets more power, it lessens their power. And that is not the case. And it's a lesson that some people have not learned, and they need to learn. And then the other part, it's just the sad truth, is that racism is still alive and well in the United States of America. I mean, I have to tell you, I thought, I did not think that we had this much racism in our society. I honestly did not, until President Obama was elected. And then when President Trump was elected, just saw a whole nother level of racism, people feeling emboldened and sort of privileged to exercise their racism and to double down on their racism. I have been, quite frankly, surprised by some of it. And we have to acknowledge that. There are people who are racist in this nation, and they are in power. And they are making decisions based on their racist ideologies. It's sad, but it is true.
Margaret, in what ways is the YWCA working to keep these issues top of mind and then to activate constituencies that would seek to make this change?
The economics of all of this, to be able to see what equity would do in the trillions of dollars in the United States economy. And there's an incredible tool, the Policy Link Equity Atlas, that you can just Google and be able to find that tool. It literally can give you your county view of what it might look like to be able to participate fully in economics by having every single corner of your community participating. And it's so powerful to be able to see that, to take that $1 trillion number and boil that down to what it means locally for your community. And I think one of the driving things that's been so successful since time immemorial is fear. And when we want to talk about mental health, we really are held hostage by a spirit of fear in this country, in my opinion. And that fear drives us to other people and discriminate. And we have always seen mental health and the mythologizing of mental health and what we think it is or what we believe is sort of twisted us into not being able to understand that in most cases, someone having a mental health episode is often handed a Band-Aid when the patient is actually having a heart attack. And so as Lisa was talking about being able to engage community partners, law enforcement, others, this is all of us to be able to really examine where we are in understanding our bias around mental health. I'm so inspired by the work happening all over the country with partners, including the YWCA, in really being able to recognize that we have blind spots when it comes to being able to support staff and clients and community members who have a disability, including a mental health disability, and at times need different supports. You know, until justice just is, we are not going to be able to fully support people in the mental health space. And they are a family, they are friends, they are us. And I am encouraged by what I see happening all across the country, at last being able to be more vocal about mental health realities. And I think this is really going to continue to take us far. But as we've got to dismantle the fear that is attached, and fear is always used so effectively. We see critical race theory. Lisa talked about that early. That is driven by fear. The who is in, who is out, getting the zero-sum game. At the end of that game has all built on a platform of fear. And it has just been just a powerful tool. And I believe that there are more of us wanting to build bridges, wanting to have deeper understandings of what mental health is, deeper understanding of our own bias, deeper understanding of how we need to structure our workplaces, our work hours, be able to think about how we provide programming to be inclusive of individuals with disabilities, including mental health. Differently abled has always been able to rise to an occasion. It's not exceptional, but we need to create platforms in which people can thrive and live and grow, and it isn't exceptional at all. And so I'm encouraged. I do believe that there are lots of us, that there are more of us, and being able to be vocal and to take stands and participate in things like our challenge until justice just is, and invite others to come in. This the game we are playing, in which you're wrong and I'm right, is the wrong game. We're coming at it all wrong. And I love what I am seeing on social media. I know that it is often pointed to as a key driver, particularly around young people and mental health today. And it is often identified as a tool for evil. But I think there's lots of good there as well, to be able to get support to people in new ways. I think about what telemedicine has done, but we also have to think about who has access to telemedicine and who doesn't. And that's the thing we're inviting. There are tools to create equity, but we need to ask ourselves who has access and who doesn't, who is gaining, who is left out, who. And when we ask ourselves these hard questions, or simple questions, or courageous questions, then we can start to figure out how we remediate. But just a thought on social media, Dara, and mental health, and where we are, particularly around young people. It isn't all. It certainly has been identified as something that has ill intent. And yet I think that there is also opportunity for growth and healing through these channels as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'll say I'm equal parts encouraged and concerned when I look at kind of the so-called social media generation or Gen Z, younger millennials, and how they are responding and reacting to these issues around, first, as Lisa was speaking about, around, the resistance to critical race theory and this kind of thing, and just the surprising amount of racism that does still exist with the younger generation. And then with the mental health issues, Margaret, that you were speaking about, I have real concern around the issues of race, particularly with, the gaming culture. And a lot of people don't realize this, people who are in our age group, we don't know anything about this. The whole world of gaming and just the rampant racism that exists there. And unfortunately, I've had many run-ins, because when I started doing what I do what some people would call like a TikTokumentaries. Some people have labeled them, or documentaries. So like little mini documentaries, usually somewhere between 1.5 minutes and 5 minutes or so, of just digestible information around race, around culture, around entertainment, and how those things intersect. And when I first started out, TikTok had a limit of 60 seconds. And so I would do just these really quick hot takes that I really don't like to do very much anymore, because they tend to just invite a lot of, kind of surface level arguments and things like that. So I like to go a little bit deeper these days. But a couple of years ago, when I first started, I did a video around the Aunt Jemima issue. And that label being taken off, and just, the real history behind that caricature, and why it was a negative representation of Black women. And just the vitriol that I saw in my comment section, a whole lot of it was coming from very, very young people, young boys primarily, young white boys. And I know this because a lot of them were doing what are called reaction videos, where you can, stitch or duet someone's video and put your commentary on what they've said. And so these boys would be, some of them as young as 9 or 10 years old. Some of the awful things. I was called everything under the sun. And I thought, well, who is teaching these kids, who are coming of age in 2020? How are you learning this stuff? And a lot of them, they're just, it's a default for a lot of them. They're learning it from each other. And, a lot of them will go through what's called, there are so many pipelines online through YouTube and other platforms for these young white boys mainly to go through what they would call racism phase. It's just a sort of natural coming of age, progression that they have to go through. And they're maybe younger or teenage years, early 20s, and then they sort of, grow out of that. But there are so many breeding grounds for that online that we don't even realize that exist. Many of their parents have absolutely no idea of the kinds of things that they are being exposed to, particularly in the gaming community. So there is, great concern and great an avenue there for that to be introduced at a very young age because of social media. But then I'm also encouraged when I look at the way that mental health is being addressed with this younger generation, the stigma around it that we had and that, generations before us had, is really, in my perception, is really beginning to slowly fall away. And they are out there having these conversations. And if there are disorders or things that they've, discussed with a therapist, even the idea of seeing a therapist, these things are starting to be a lot less stigmatized than they were even, I would say, even 10 years ago. Things are rapidly shifting in that way. So I am very much encouraged in that regard.
Dara, nonetheless, artists of color continue to face barriers as you grow your career. You get put in a box, whether it's the genre or what you make or the credit you receive for your work. Even as you see some of these barriers beginning to fall away, how does that affect an artist's mental health status, especially an artist like you who is working so earnestly in the social justice space?
Yeah, it can be, artists we are creative, vulnerable people. A lot of us don't know how to quite create that armor or that shell that maybe you would develop in the corporate space to say, hey, this is, these things that are happening to you, they are not necessarily personally directed at you. This is systemic. These issues are systemic. And we take on a lot of that in a very, very personal way. And then to add to that difficulty, we are a part of what would be referred to as the gig economy. We are essentially freelancers, and oftentimes don't have a consistent form of employment. We deal with a lot of economic insecurity, and oftentimes do not have health insurance, and really have no consistent way to address mental health issues when they come up, or issues of housing insecurity. Not to mention, the havoc that the pandemic wreaked on artists and artists of color in particular. It has been very rough for a lot of people. I'm fortunate to be married to someone who has, more of what he would call a straight job. But if you're just kind of out there as an artist and doing your thing, your entire world was shut down in 2020. And for a lot of us, for a lot of artists of color, they still have not recovered. Things are not the same, and they will never be the same. And I have a personal friend who was very much involved in the music community, and they were, involved in, facilitating artist booking and that kind of thing, venue management. And when the pandemic hit, they started to deal with some serious mental health issues around just, illness, anxiety, even, more so than what most of us would really go through. They still have not recovered mentally from that, and are not able to engage or go out and just hear music and appreciate music or play music. And, so when that happens, their entire world just shuts down. And unfortunately, that's something that disproportionately affects artists of color, because we're already operating within a very, oftentimes a very marginalized space already. You mentioned kind of being segmented off into specific genres, and, for instance, being called R&B or being called hip hop, when, your expression or my expression may be something, more akin to really folk or rock, or, there's just a broad spectrum that a lot of us can cover, but we do tend to be walled off into corners according to, people's perception of what our music is and what we have to offer. So yeah, I feel that these issues of mental health have disproportionately affected people of color. Absolutely.
So to that end, how can the community support musicians and artists and social justice advocates like you, so that you can have that support, and then use the platform that you have to do the things that you do, such as challenging racism and housing inequality, mental health disparities, and so much more?
Well, I think, I did a podcast a few days ago with I did a German podcast. Part of my background is in German studies, and I spent some time living in Germany and Switzerland. And so it's really cool to be able to connect with some folks internationally, and to kind of see how these issues are being handled outside of the United States. And it's very interesting because their podcast has governmental support. It has support through arts endowments through the German government. And they were able to pay me for my time. I mean, I'm rarely paid to appear on any podcast. I would never expect that. But it was just a normal part of their process. And so I think arts funding is so important. And it really, I was very discouraged actually to see yesterday, Ann Powers, who works for NPR Music, said that they're dealing with just a record number of layoffs. And, she's like, well, if you're a PR person who's reaching out to us and you're not getting answers, please be understanding, because we're dealing with a ton of layoffs. And if you send us a message of concern, we really appreciate that, because we're going through it. So organizations that support artists, I think we maybe don't talk about this enough, supporting the organizations that support artists, and fighting for governmental support of, National Endowment for the Arts, and, organizations like that really have to do with helping the lives of artists to be as stable as they possibly can, because we are heavily dependent on organizations like that if we don't want to be just completely susceptible to the, Lisa was speaking of, interest rate hikes and all of these, random things that are happening that we have absolutely no control over, and very little employment insecurity. So I would say, lobbying for support of arts foundations and contributing to arts foundations. And my husband is in radio. He's a radio broadcaster. So they're dealing with their own crisis. That also is an industry that supports artists. And when they have insecurity, we have insecurity. So I would say that that's a really substantial way that just the average person, other than supporting the artists themselves, can really help to create, an economy that supports artists, supporting the organizations that facilitate artists being able to do what we do.
If I can put a plug in here for what you just said, Dara, I would love to do that. My son is an artist. He's a popper. When you talked about the mental health challenges and the emotional challenges that artists go through, particularly when the pandemic hit, we experienced that. My son and I, my son had won the U.S. competition for the Juste Debout. It's called a Juste Debout competition. Everybody has heard of the Les Twins who danced with Beyonce. They helped sponsor that, and my son won the U.S. competition, and we had traveled to France for him to compete internationally. And the day of the competition, the French Minister of Health shut down the city because of COVID. So he couldn't compete. He was all geeked about it. Artists had traveled from all over the globe, Japan, Korea, Italy, everywhere to Paris for this competition. And all of the artists were just so dejected. And then we had to try and get back to the United States because all of the countries were shutting down. We did make it back to the US in time. And then he was prepared for everything to be shut down for 1 month. Then they said it was 2 months. Then it extended to 3 months. And it was shut down for so long, he couldn't compete, he couldn't work. And he really suffered because of that. And they're now, the dancing community is now getting back. But he's in a genre that isn't really supported by mass society, and it isn't really supported by a lot of people of color, right? Some of the world's most renowned poppers, even though popping was originated in the United States of America in Oakland, California, the biggest poppers are in Korea and Russia and Japan and other places, because we as a community we as Americans, right, are not supporting these artistic forms that were birthed here in the United States of America. And so I want to just chime in, sister girl, with you and encourage everybody who is watching this, support the arts, support our artists, go see the shows, force yourself to get out, experience a new artistic expression that you may not be familiar with. Get out there and experience it, try something new, you just may like it.
Mm-hmm. We could have an entirely new panel to talk about supporting the arts and cultural appropriation and how that has impacted communities of color. But I want to say thank you to Dara, and to Lisa, and Margaret. I want to give you the last word as we see, and I hate to use this cliche, but it's so true. A rising tide lifts all boats. And if we can unite around these causes and make a difference individually in the communities where we live and serve, we can truly create a society where, Margaret, as the YWCA now says, justice just is. I'll give you the last word.
Thank you, Candace, and thank you, Dara and Lisa. This has been such an amazing conversation. I just feel lifted, encouraged, and activated to be able to remain in this amazing fight, the good fight, good trouble. And so thank you so much for being with us today. I am encouraged. I invite everybody to join us in our Until Justice Just Is campaign and to think about taking a journey with us for 21 days through our Racial Justice Challenge as well, and an opportunity to take a deep dive into music and really understand some of the theory and practice and pedagogy and opportunity and magic and change that has happened. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has been our partner curating this week. And please join us for looking at our disability justice, our mental health justice, and our housing justice weeks as well. There's also so much for us to learn here. We have amazing YWCAs all across the country who are there for you to be able to partner with you individually and as community partners to be able to further our mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. We are here for you. We are here for each other. And I'm so delighted that I got to listen in on this amazing conversation today. I'm so full, so resourced, and I want to thank all three of you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Wow, what a powerful discussion. Hello, my name is Alfie Rodriguez, and I serve as the VP of Strategy, Impact, and Evaluation for YWCA USA. This conversation speaks so well to why the work that YWCA associations carry out in communities across the country is so important. We now invite you to take the next step in the learning journey by joining us in the YWCA Racial Justice Challenge. The challenge is an action component of our Until Justice Just Is campaign. The YWCA Racial Justice Challenge creates space to build more effective social justice habits. Running for 21 days, participants engage in daily challenge activities from reading an article to listening to a podcast, providing an opportunity to reflect on personal experiences. This year, we're building on the conversation you just heard, and we'll be exploring the topics of disability, housing, music, and mental health. Making an impact on systemic injustices requires all of us, and now is the time. The YWCA Racial Justice Challenge is an opportunity to learn about social structures and some of the barriers that have negatively impacted women and people of color. This is your opportunity to get involved, to learn, share, and discuss some of the most important challenges facing us today. I'm thrilled to introduce Debbie Esparza, CEO of YWCA Metropolitan Phoenix and YWCA USA board member. Debbie is going to let you know how you can join the movement and participate in the challenge.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Margaret, Mitchell, YWCA USA, and the esteemed panel of speakers. That was a brilliant conversation. And I'm excited to be here now to invite all of us to join in the next step. The next step is the Racial Justice Challenge. Now, those of you that have taken the challenge before, you know that it's every day you'll get an email with things to read or a podcast or a video to learn about the topics. And it's self-paced. You can take it when you want. I know I've already blocked out my calendar for 30 minutes a day for those 21 days. It goes from April 17th through May 15th. It's just Monday through Friday. So that gives you, or gives me, the chance to catch up when I need to on the weekend and then sink into it a little bit more so that I can really do some reflection on the topics and the learnings that I've had. I do it that way. I block out my calendar so that I have dedicated space and time to build the muscle about learning about racial justice issues, and particularly these types of topics through the lens of race and gender. That's what gets me so excited about this work. I can see the whole world now through the lens of race and gender, And these topics, the way that they are provided to us on a daily basis, lets me sink into it a little bit deeper each time. This year's topics, as you heard the speakers talk about, disability, housing, mental health, music. Those of you that have been a part of the YWCA for a while, again, this is just one of the important ways that we're moving the needle to eliminate racism and empower women. Those of you that are new, you'll see a lot of exciting things that we can do together on a national level. Stay engaged with YWCA USA, and also take a look at your local associations. We're all around the country. I'm in Phoenix, but we're everywhere. So please make a friend at your YWCA. You can join the online community through the website or on a phone app. And right after, you're going to see a demo on how it works. You can register, or you can go directly, because you know what you want. You can go directly to justice.ywca.org. Be well.
Thank you, Debbie, for joining us, for sharing your passion, both for the YWCA Racial Justice Challenge and your work in general. Now let me show you how to get started. Go to justice.ywca.org and download the app. Register to join the YWCA Racial Justice Challenge in English or Spanish. You can also participate online without the app with the desktop version. Each day you will see new content on the weekly theme. You'll have access to curated articles on housing, disability, mental health, and music. Lessons will include stories, videos, and podcasts. You can engage in discussion with participants across the country. The YWCA Racial Justice Challenge will run for 21 days, from April 17th to May 15th, Monday to Friday. It's open to everyone, so make sure to invite family, friends, and coworkers. Join us, download the app, and sign up today.
Good afternoon. My name is Tina Herrera, Chair of YWCA USA's Board of Directors, and I would like to thank you for attending our kickoff event for YWCA's annual Racial Justice Initiative Until Justice Just Is, or YWCAI for short. This year is extra special since we are focusing the entire month of April on our racial justice efforts instead of just 1 week as we've done traditionally. We're excited to be hosting this kickoff event to get you excited for our upcoming Racial Justice Challenge and for the plethora of events that our network of local YWCAs are hosting in communities all around the country to address systemic racism. I am honored to be part of what has been a deeply moving and powerful event, highlighting YWCA's work in housing, how that work intersects with mental health challenges and disability status, and how music can help lead the way to advocate for people of color and those facing structural racism and systemic inequality. I would like to thank our inspiring and knowledgeable lineup of community leaders, experts, policymakers, and influencers who all came here in the name of advancing justice and ensuring equity for all. Thank you to our amazing speakers, YWCA USA CEO Margaret Mitchell, Candace Presley, Lisa Rice, Dara Starr-Tucker, and Michelle Wu for sharing their time and insights with us as we work together to find pathways for justice and greater equity. Thank you for being here today as we work together to heal centuries of compounded inequalities and focus on building solutions to issues impacting communities across the nation. The conversation we just watched was designed as an opportunity to familiarize you with the work we do and the topics that will be covered in the YWCA Racial Justice Challenge. I want to personally invite you to take the challenge and join this online learning community with thousands of others who are looking to make a difference and work together to find solutions to the systemic inequalities that get in the way of building a peaceful, just, and equitable world for us all. Please join the conversation. Follow along with us on social media throughout the month of April and beyond. You can also take action by signing up for YWCA Racial Justice Challenge, taking our Until Justice Justice Pledge, and more by visiting YWCAI website, justice.ywca.org. You can also find out more about what YWCA is doing to address housing inequality, support people of color, and address racial injustice in your community by visiting ywca.org and selecting Find Your YWCA. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and being in partnership with YWCA in our mission to eliminate racism, empower women, advance social justice, help families, and strengthen communities.